Okay, the recording has started, and this is the May 11th, 2020 Crossplane community meeting. We will start, as always, with our milestone checkup. So since the last community meeting, we released the V0.10 release on April 29th. The release notes are linked here in the agenda document. Thank you, Nick and Dan for running that release, and some great release notes here about some of the features that made it in. We had talked about a lot of these, I think, in the last community meeting because we're pretty close to doing the 0.10 release, but this is a great write-up if folks hadn't seen it for everything that was included in that release. Side note, I was trying to figure out when the release date was, and GitHub just says 12 days ago, and I had to ask Google. I said, Google, what was 12 days ago? Maybe there's a better way to do that, but that is what I did. So it was April 29th. So V0.11, we have traditionally had a mid-monthly cadence of our releases where we release every month around the middle of the month. We pushed back the release a bit for 0.10 to get some extra features and polish and completion into some of the new features like composition. And so we will be getting back, excuse me, to our mid-monthly release this time again for 0.11. And the proposal is to release on Monday, May 18th. So that's 1 week from today. And I don't think there's going to be a huge investment in new features and a lot of deeper changes, but there will be polishing, bug fixes, and we've started some deeper conversations and a bigger investment around documentation to continue to figure out what the right approach is, what are the design of it, and the key scenarios that we want to be sharing and have a nice experience for new users to the project to be able to be productive and functional when they come to the site and start trying to use Crossplane. I think we need to do a roadmap update. Phil, is the roadmap updated to include 0.11 objectives?
I'm going to have a PR open here in a second.
Oh, okay, great. That sounds good. And but this was pretty general, bug fixing, polishing, and documentation. Were there on the call here today? Was there any strong beliefs about what should be included or what some investments should be, like Dan or Nick or anybody?
We are doing some out-of-band work on determining what sort of time and ownership there is for the docs, and we're going to be sharing that with folks and making sure to get a wide range of opinions on what should be included there.
Cool. And then for API documentation, we're going to still continue. Is there going to be more investment in the crd.dev site, Dan?
Every weekend.
Cool. Has there been any adoption of it from other projects yet too?
Yeah, I mean, you can see you just pulled up here. We added cluster API on here this morning.
Oh yeah.
So cool. The folks over there were interested in having it supported, so went ahead and put that on there. Still doing manual additions right now, not just parsing any repo, just to kind of make sure we get all the edge cases ironed out. But hopefully, eventually, it's just going to be like GoDoc, where it supports any repo anywhere.
Cool, very cool. That's awesome that upstream is getting some adoption of this as well. Nice. Okay, so Phil will follow up with a roadmap update with the PR for 0.11 objectives. And thank you for that, Phil. All right, any other notes on 0.11 1 week from today, targeting the release? Is there a comment on the provider Alibaba and the status of that, or if we could include that in a release with all the good set of 0.1 functionality?
Yeah, I think we can make a first release for Alibaba cloud provider. We're ready for that, and we still need to add some documentation about how to use it, right? And we'll definitely work on that. Please assign it to Hongchao if you want to create a task.
For documentation.
Yeah, for documentation and guidance about how to use the Alibaba Cloud Provider with the Alibaba Cloud, because essentially Alibaba Cloud is not very friendly for international users. So we need to figure out how we can fix that problem.
For the Alibaba Cloud Provider, another thing that we were talking about, this is kind of the first time in a long time that we've added a completely new provider. So we were sort of talking about what would make it release ready. And another thing that would help a lot is adding some tests to this repository. I think as far as I know, there's no tests at the moment. So I think I'd feel really good if there was 2 resources in there instead of 1. But barring that, I know that's a bit of a big ask for next week. So just getting some tests in there for the RDS instance would make us a lot more confident in sort of saying that this is an official Crossplane provider.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Awesome. Yeah, that'll be really cool, Harry, to have Alibaba, the provider Alibaba kind of included in with its first official release as well. I'm super excited for that. All right. Okay, anything else about the releases, or we can move on to the community topics now? Okay. We've had some awesome we've had the treat of 2 TBS episodes from Dan here since the last community meeting. Dan, do you want to talk about both of those real quick? Because they were both fascinating.
Yeah, for sure. The Knative one was really fun. It was with Matt Moore. And we showed, kind of similar to the OpenFAS episode we had a while back, just consuming managed services provisioned by Crossplane and serverless functions from Knative. So that was cool. It was a really nice workflow. We also demonstrated some of the work they are doing with secret binding. So we provisioned by referencing a secret directly in the service, and also then used their SQL binding to inject the secret into the file system of the container of the serverless function. So that was pretty cool to see. And they are doing some pretty innovative stuff with their controllers over there. So we had kind of a more general architecture discussion as well. That episode ran a little long, but there's a lot of good information there. Valero was also great because we recently kind of made a push in Crossplane to support the functionality that Valero provides. So it was definitely something that we are familiar with and really excited about being able to support that. It also was a little bit different than a lot of their use cases because Valero, for those who aren't familiar, kind of helps you back up and migrate Kubernetes resources because our resources represent external cloud infrastructure. You can do some pretty creative things like moving your control plane from one cluster to another and automatically reassuming control of existing cloud infrastructure. So we showed some things like provisioning WordPress and then destroying the cluster and starting a new one and restoring there, not having any downtime between. So there's some really interesting stuff there. I think there's going to be some further collaboration. They actually already addressed an issue we opened about how they were restoring some CRDs. So big shout out to the team over there.
This is not strictly related to TDS, but taking the opportunity to mention something about the Valero work that Ryan pointed out, I think yesterday. One thing that we did, basically we had a use case that said that we want to be able to back up and restore Crossplane custom resources, and we prioritized that and rolled through and made the fixes necessary across all of our repos. And one of those involved a change to the OEM controller where, for instance, we were adding a UID before, which prevented it from being backed up and restored because it's changed when you delete a resource and recreate it. And we didn't really communicate that this was like a project that was touching all repos because we never really had to before. It's usually just been kind of the Crossplane core team sort of rolling through and supporting these things. But Ryan kind of pointed out that we just sort of went and did that. So we may need a better process in future to sort of communicate changes like that, where we probably need to make them to all repos, and those repos now have distributed ownership sort of thing, and you're going to have different maintainer teams and things like that. I don't know if that looks like a Crossplane maintainers mailing list or something eventually.
Yeah, that's a good point, Nick, and then thanks for the feedback to Ryan on that as well. That being able to understand the needs of all consumers and contributors to the project, and making sure that who are the key stakeholders and do they have a say in the changes, and then also downstream impacts of who their consumers and how they may be affected by changes, broad changes as well. So yeah, that's a good reminder.
No, I'm actually the more general question is this. So it's a dependency across repro. I don't know how to check that because the CI wouldn't pick up that change. I only found it out when I changed the Helm install to the latest. Then I see the difference and breaks the code. What's the general way to do that?
So I
like
think
moving forward, how do we make sure some change in one repo doesn't affect the other repo, just in general?
Well, I think one of the ways that we're doing that right now is having these libraries that are shared across, and then having releases and sharing release notes and mentioning breaking changes in those. So in this case, we're in sort of a weird situation where the application configuration controller was in core Crossplane, and then code was moved to OAM Kubernetes runtime. So it's kind of a unique situation. In general, I think we're set up pretty well to kind of have the traditional kind of downstream consumption of libraries. So I imagine that's how it'll be supported in the future. And those kind of things will be more apparent. It is still a little weird with OAM Kubernetes runtime because it's basically just controllers that Crossplane is, doing the setup function for to add to the controller manager. But if those changes are happening in OAM Kubernetes runtime and then Crossplane updates, that should be part of its release process to know that its dependencies have changed, and that should be apparent in notes and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Let me see, because even in this current setting, right? If you change the OAM Kubernetes runtime and it breaks one of the repo, like the remote and the local, that checking will not be blocked by any CI. That's what I was wondering, because that CI will pass. The only thing will break is when the next checking on the other repos, then we'll see the CI fail. That's actually what I see. I find out because I changed the CI setting, then the CI failed. How does that work? Is that supposed to be like that? Or ideally I want the first change can see the other repo get break and then get blocked there.
So it sounds like you're saying that maybe we should have a regression testing or integration testing framework that for OAM is spinning up all of the moving parts of OAM.
Yeah.
I'm just asking in general, how do you solve that problem? Not I don't have any suggestion actually.
So this, Arthur, I agree with Nick. I think I've seen this in Dapper as well, where we use each retests. So that's the only way to get all the puzzle pieces to work together. So use each retest. It's needed.
Yeah, I think there's two parts to this, which is that test will be the validation, but as Dan pointed out, we'll be able to do a much better job of surfacing this once we're semantically versioning the OAM runtime library, so that you'll at least have to actively choose to get the new version, and then you'll be able to see the release notes and have reason to expect that something might break. There'll hopefully be a big breaking change. This thing goes away in there.
But these two things are orthogonal, right? You can have one without the other one, right?
Sorry, you can without you said you can, right? Not cannot.
Yeah, they're positive. I'm saying that you're allowed to have one without the other.
Yeah, exactly. I think they would both be good. And the reason I'm pointing it out mostly is because building those integration tests is typically something that I see being really nice to do, that is quite hard to do and takes a while to get done. So the versioning the OAM runtime library is probably going to come first and be, get us 30% of the way there, and then 70% of the way we'll be writing those tests that spin up everything and test everything in the same version and understand what version works with what.
Okay,
Yeah.
I got that.
Yeah, I think all that makes sense, and it's probably like a phased sort of thing where, like that Nick was referring to, of but throughout most all of the projects within the Crossplane organization, they are semantically versioned and have official releases and such as well. So that shouldn't be too hard to incorporate into our process for this repo as well. Let's see, is Move Off on the call? No, I think he's not actually. Nick, would you like to give us a quick update with where composition is and any particular plans for 0.11 around that as well?
Yes, I'm trying to think whether I should sort of do an update versus the last community meeting or not. I'm not sure if we spoke about it much then. So The design PR that's linked in these docs explains our overall vision for composition. We pushed to get an MVP of this functionality into 0.10 for infrastructure. So I think almost everyone on this call has probably heard me talk about it before, so I'll kind of assume that you know what composition is, but roughly it's pretty much going to replace Crossplane resource classes and claims. So our goal at the moment is to deprecate resource classes and claims. They'll still be there, but they'll be marked deprecated in the 0.11 release, and to document using composition instead. So part of the reason that we want to do that is because it opens up a lot of use cases where you can compose infrastructure of multiple different things in your API object. So you can compose a database in a firewall rule or a database in a user and sort of say that they're a new kind of resource called my great database or something like that, and provide those as an infrastructure operator to your users. So as to what functionality is there, maybe the easiest way to think about it, if you do want to go and sort of read a little bit about this afterwards, is the design doc talks about infrastructure and application composition. We've only added support for infrastructure composition at this point. We are missing a few things. For example, if you edit a requirement for a resource, which is kind of the new resource claim concept, we would like it to actually go and make those changes flow on to all the composed resources, but it is not at the moment. So that is one place that needs to be worked on in future. We also would like to be able to force a composition. A composition is kind of like a resource class under the new design, or set one as a default. I believe neither of those are supported at the moment. You can just select them using labels. And going into 0.11, I don't think we're going to change a lot of functionality, really. We're mostly shoring up test. Like we actually shipped this missing quite a lot of test coverage. So a lot of what we're doing at the moment is adding tests, polishing, finding bugs, and fixing them. So no functionality changes going into 0.11 really of any significance, mostly bug fixes, I believe. There is also, I'm not sure if it comes up in that issue query, but another thing that would be good to get feedback on, it's the top thing in that query, is the composition revision proposal, which proposes, we have a similar problem with compositions that we had with OEM application configurations, where you have one sort of thing that's a template and it's shared by many resources. So if someone goes and edits the template, then all of those resources potentially would get updated. And we're thinking about taking a similar approach to what was proposed with OEM by adding a revision type similar to the controller revision in Kubernetes that would allow you to explicitly move back and forward versions of the composition you're using. So feedback wanted on that. Does anyone have any questions about composition? It's a very complicated topic, so I don't know quite what audience to tailor my updates to.
Well, Nick, a quick question for me is the composition revision discussion here. Is this only within the issue, or is there a PR like design update for it too?
It's only within the issue at the moment.
Okay.
There is no update to the design doc, and that's largely because I wrote this issue before the design doc was merged. So yeah, I kind of want to get some feedback on this issue before I go and open a PR.
Okay, there you go. I dropped a link to it in the agenda doc. All right, any other questions on composition that Nick had solicited here?
Yeah, I actually left a few comments in the composition PR, and I'm actually not very sure that how we handle the application layer with composition. My personal feeling is that composition is not a very common use case for to compose several pieces of applications into the same application definition. But I also noticed that part in the proposal. So I'm not sure what's the plan for the application definition part.
We should maybe sync and talk about that out of hand, because I think that there might be some misunderstandings here, because the assertion doesn't quite make sense to me, because we compose several things together into an application in the same way OEM composes several things together into an application. It's just a different pattern, different language for doing that thing. But I think we saw the feedback, and we would like to sync up at some point and see if we can find some alignment there. There's no plans to implement application composition by 0.11 anyway, so it's not really a priority for this week or anything like that, but we're happy to set up a chat to talk about how it interfaces with OEM before we start in earnest on that functionality.
Yeah. I think it's also very important that we can sync up or run into how we handle the application definition, because I noticed that it's really, really complicated. Maybe we may have some understanding about its functionality. Yeah, be sure to do that.
So Nick, would it be fair to say that for 0.11, we're just focused on infrastructure definitions and then how those might be used in OHM?
Yep. We're not working on an application, the application definition or composition for the 0.11 timeframe.
Cool. Right on.
I think it is though still something that we do want to pursue. So after 0.11, we definitely should follow up on it. I think we've spent months and months and months and months working on this design, and we're honest about it. So I don't think we agree that it's inferior or too complicated, to be honest. I'm biased. I let the proposal.
Cool.
Sounds great. Okay, and then I have a number of updates around OHM support specifically. Then I asked Dan to include a couple of these on here. So I think Dan had added, I think, all of these issues here. So do you want to just speak real quick about those, or whoever's on the call for these two, if they can speak for them themselves. Dan, do you want to start?
Yeah, for sure. So I just added in those other two. So when I get to them, Ryan, feel free to jump in, or Hong Chao. I don't know if he's on the call. But this first one is just adding integration tests. I just dropped it because it was an update, something we had talked about. So we have some integration tests on the OEM Kubernetes runtime now. These are kind of a model for how we might do integration testing more in Crossplane, which is a sorely needed area to improve upon. So excited to actually have some of those running. One thing I will mention here is this was super easy with GitHub Actions. It was really easy to get it going just because there's basically one for a kind cluster on there. So it might be something that's worth taking a look at for that. It still uses the build submodule to actually run the integration tests, but they run on GitHub Actions. Another thing, well, I'm not sure there's actually any more on that. I'll go ahead and give a quick summary of this kind of bring your own trait, which is my chosen name. That's not what the PR is called, but it's just kind of a summary. Essentially, we want to enable being able to use existing Kubernetes resource types, either native Kubernetes types or just ones implemented by other projects as traits. And this PR is a design that Ryan has put together for enabling that. And there is quite a few comments on it at this point. So feel free to weigh in there. And Ryan, if you want to add any more, I think I saw you on the call. Yeah, you're still here. You're welcome to jump in here.
Yeah, so I think the only last thing that we are still not decided on is actually two things. One thing is, I think if you scroll down, if you scroll down to the bottom of it, I had a comment at the end. I think the only thing we're not agree on, I don't know if you can see, anyway, agree on is, one is, will we allow user to bring in their own CRDs? If we do that, then use a different name, but the original proposal doesn't have that. And so it seems like we're not 100% synced on that side. I just want to make sure here. Yeah.
I think you might be talking about me in that case, and I'm sorry if I gave that impression. I'm on board with bringing your own CR.
Okay.
Yeah, I have no issue with bringing your own CR. The main thing that I've been going back and forth and sort of a little bit of a dog with a bone here was the design really makes it sound like we want to switch this from a field to an annotation so people can bring their own CR, and those two things.
Okay, yeah.
So I'm on board with the functionality, just
agree.
Technical details.
Okay, agree. Then good. Then the only last thing that we need to think is it better to jump to a field, an optional field? So since we need to accommodate any CRD, so this has to be a optional field.
So that's where we've just got the disconnect again. We don't need to accommodate any CRD, right? Because the CRDs that you bring to Kubernetes won't use this reference. They won't understand this is
I think the difference is more like whether we want to have a structured way to define this relationship or the unstructured way. So
No, hold on. We are not there yet. Nick, I just need to make sure we are on the same page on this side. Are you saying that we can still require users to have this structured have this field even if we want to bring any CRDs? I didn't fully get that part.
Yeah, let me try and explain my thinking here. So it seems like what we're saying. So for the others who are on the call who might not be familiar with this specific thing, traits have a reference to the workload that they apply to. And currently, in the one trait that we've implemented, the manual scalar trait, that is a spec field. It's schemified. It's described by the CRD, and it's called spec.workloadRef. And the OAM controller for manual scalar trait knows how to pass that and knows how to say, oh, I apply to that workload because I have a reference to it. And now what we're saying is, well, that's potentially limiting because that means it assumes that every OAM trait has this spec.workloadRef. And Harry and Ryan have brought some examples of things that you might want to bring a Kubernetes CR and use it as a trait and maybe this Kubernetes CR doesn't know it's a trait, maybe it doesn't know anything about OAM. So an example was the etcd backup CR, which I think comes from the etcd operator. You could use that as a trait. And so then the thinking is, okay, well, if that's going to be a trait and it needs a reference to its workload, we can't put assumptions on its schemas. So we're saying maybe we'll move that into annotations because we can't say the etcd backup, which we'd have no control over its CR, will have a spec.workloadRef. So my point is putting annotations on that, as far as I can tell, unless I'm missing something in this design, is effectively pointless because the etcd backup controller doesn't know about those annotations. It won't use it. It has a spec field called etcd endpoints, and that's how it figures out what it backs up. It will just always ignore etcd stuff. Sorry, always ignore OAM stuff. So yeah. In my mind, I categorize these into sort of two different patterns. There's traits that we wrote intending to be OAM traits, and those can use this metadata about a workload. We can make use of that. And then there's CRs that you bring to be an OAM trait. And these CRs that you bring are just always going to use whatever they use today to find what they apply to. They're not going to know anything about OAM. So I don't think we should consider them as to whether we do an annotation or a spec field. I think we're saying that only this kind, only the ones that we write, will understand this metadata, whether it's a spec field or an annotation. And if that's the case, typically, if I'm given a choice between modeling structured data in annotations or in spec fields, I would put them in a spec field because this is not just a simple string. It requires that 3 different strings be there, the API version, group, and kind.
Okay. I get it. So just, again, make sure that, because currently the implementation assumes that it has to have this field. We can agree that it's not a required field. That's all I want to, the first step is just agree that this doesn't have to be required.
Yeah, I agree that it shouldn't be required.
Okay.
I'm not 100% sure I would have to go check, but the field path tool that we use to set this, in a lot of cases, field path is kind of best effort. It just tries to set a field. And if the CR doesn't support that field, it just says, put it there. So it may not actually be required at the moment, but if it is required in practice, then I agree we should make it optional.
Okay. Harry, then we can do the next version. Like Harry, we are going to talk about whether it should be.
The structured vs unstructured. I personally have no opinion about that, but I agree with Nick that if you want to, go to the structured way, we can definitely go to the workload ref. So it seems that Wonderflow also want to go to the structured implementation. So
here's my take. I think structure definitely seems better. It's just personal opinion. Like feels better when you putting a structured thing instead of like unstructured. The only thing is, does that mean we kind of need to change the spec or?
No, you don't need to change the spec. Actually, this is not part of the spec at all. The only thing we want to add in the spec is like a recommendation about.
I know.
Implementation.
More like implementation. When it becomes structured, It just feels like now where do we put that requirement then? We still need to document that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
that's
That is an
it starts to
issue.
become like a pseudo ref. Yeah.
I think currently the most lightweight way is we add a recommendation or practice part in the trait documentation of OM spec. That will be the most easy way to do, but it's not part of the spec.
Yeah, we actually talked about this a while back, and it was
Yeah, it's really hard.
that issue about can runtimes add fields that aren't part of the spec. I think I agree that it should be a recommendation rather than part of the spec, because maybe other runtimes don't need this or want to do something else.
Yeah.
And I think realistically, either way, whether you're saying it can optionally go in the spec or optionally go in the annotation, you kind of you're putting constraints on the runtime anyway, or putting requirements on the runtime. So I would put it in the spec and say it's optional, and just document that, hey, if you're a trait and you're writing a controller to be a trait specifically, we strongly recommend you add this field, and Crossplane will automatically take care of it if you do support this field.
Yeah.
Wasn't this field going into the trait definition though?
No.
Yeah, we talked. There's kind of there's 2 or 3 things going on in this design. One of the things that we talked about was how a workload would figure out what resource kinds it works on. So, for instance, a containerized workload can declare that it might produce a deployment in a service rather. And that I think Ryan proposed putting into the metadata of the workload definition, which I think is a really good idea. And in general, if that was possible, I would support that here. But because in this case for traits, we're talking about an instance of a trait referencing a specific instance of a workload, we can't just put that all in the definition. It has to be at the instance level.
Exactly. So I don't think it's part of the trace definition. Trace definition is more like a index to the CRD the trait will use, and with extra fields like applies to, which is generally a feature of the trait. But this field is not a feature of the trait. It's more like what we need for the implementation to work. So we don't need to enforce it at all, and it should not be part of the OM spec at all.
This is just internal mechanism to.
Yeah, it's totally internal. We just need to have these fields to make it work.
I see. Okay.
Cool.
Yeah,
If there's
so-
any, go ahead.
Yeah, so what's the verdict? We're going to put in a separate document, or where do we make this recommendations? I agree it's not in a spec. I agree with everything. It's just I'm not entirely sure on the results.
Yeah, I think we can just put a section in the OM spec documentation, which is titled as implementation recommendation, or something like that.
Yeah, it could also be worth documenting this as part of OEM Kubernetes runtime, because that's where the application configuration logic that would add this reference for you automatically is. And so that could be like any place that we're saying any Kubernetes stuff.
Yeah,
Right.
that's where I think it seems more appropriate.
Yeah, then we can do that.
Yeah, and just to follow on from for the trait workload interaction pull request, if the only things that I think stopping me from approving that at the moment is if we could encode what we just aligned on there, say that we'll use a spec field, and also if you could put Harry's example of the entity backup in there, it would be really handy, because that design doc does talk about this use case. And it'd be nice,
Sure.
and I know it's stated already in the other issue, but if you just copy it into the design so that people can find it in future, that would be really nice.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll update that just right after meeting.
Thanks.
Awesome. All right. I don't think Hong Chao is on the call here today. Is there a quick update we can get about addressing packaging of home controllers otherwise, though?
Yeah, I can just give a brief overview. Basically, we're just trying to figure out the best way to install controllers, because there's both the local and remote scenario. This specific issue is talking about packaging them into the Crossplane Helm chart, which is one option. But I have a feeling that with some of the upcoming refactoring and that sort of thing, that this might kind of become more apparent and sort itself out on its own. But this is probably the issue where we'll track that sort of thing. But basically, we want to make the experience a little better because right now it is a bit of a pain to install Crossplane and then add these controllers that are doing most of the ohm heavy lifting here. So just wanted to service that in the meeting today.
Cool. Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it.
Yeah, there's a higher level question, I think is, I'm not entirely sure if Hongchao mentioned that in that proposal or PR, is are we going to do a Helm chart install, or from my current understanding is at least the remote add-on, you would do Helm chart install the Crossplane, and then there's a stack manager that manage the add-on. Are we going to keep that thing, or user can do just one Helm chart with whatever sub chart or whatever to install both?
Yeah, I think that's the core question here. And like I said, right now the stack install is a pretty good experience because it's a simple thing for the end user to install. That being said, like I said, I think some changes are going to be made to that process. And I think as part of that, it might become apparent how we want to do these OEM controllers specifically.
Okay, thanks.
And there's actually already support for installing stacks as part of the Helm install with the cluster stack install YAML template for the Helm chart. And those actually accept other stacks that aren't even listed there. So
yeah, I think the issue with that is that the main thing here is that the OEM local is not packaged as a stack, so it's packaged as a Helm chart, so we can't make use of just installing.
So if it was packaged as a stack, then it could use that existing mechanism, and then
yeah. So it's more about how we're packaging it up, I think.
Okay.
So yeah.
I think something that Dan was alluding to there that I won't make any promises on because it's still really early days, but we're figuring out some potential changes or improvements to sort of packages and stacks and things like that. So we may, probably in the order of weeks, or months, have a design doc that sort of clarifies where that sort of part of Crossplane is going.
Yeah, that sounds good. I think that, making sure that the idea or the concept of stacks and packaging and et cetera in the Crossplane ecosystem is something that is, functional and useful and helps adoption. So that further discussions about that would be really useful. Hashdan, last one here. Service tracker.
Yep. So right now service tracker is set up to run on top of Crossplane, and we saw some demos of doing that on different cloud providers. So some really awesome functionality there. It would be nice to also show how we could, instead of using stacks or, just manually creating these managed resources, if we could basically create all the managed resources required for service tracker in one go by using composition. So for instance, on Azure, not having to manually create that VNet rule and things like that. So should be an improved user experience. It shouldn't be a huge heavy lift because the great thing about composition is that you can define all of this in YAML. So we just want to show that functionality with Service Tracker, since that's kind of our core app that we're showing off at this point that shows all the different parts of Crossplane and OAM.
That's cool.
Yeah, right on. That was fun to see all those demos. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, that could be really cool. Yeah, today people complain about that. Complain a lot about, okay, even today you have YAML files to bootstrap your infrastructure, but you still have to do a lot of manual configuration across different products on the cloud. I think, yeah, this demo will show them, okay, this is really the power of the declarative application management. It's really cool.
Yeah, right on. Agreed. Casey, I think you're on the call here. Do you want to give us an update on the code generation? Your design proposal PR had been merged, so you can update us here on the in-tree design or proposal doc.
Yeah, so I think the big update right now is that we are working on figuring out the back end of that whole tool, how it will go from the intermediate format, the managed resource schema format, to boilerplate for controllers. And there's also some conversation on a GitHub issue for using Kubeform. So I think there's some questions about like if the Terraform front end option. I think people want to hear more about that sooner rather than later. So I think we're going to do some work this week to develop a stronger position on kind of how Terraform fits into the project.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a good investment to understand and at least have a well-informed stance on that, and if it can accelerate the project or if it's the right architecture decision, etc. Great.
Right.
Alrighty. Okay, so that was everything that is in the community topics and questions section here. Before we head on to the PR section, is there anything else agenda topics here for community topics?
I want to add an issue in the OM support. Actually, it's about the application scope implementation in Crossplane, which is the last part for the full OM support in the Crossplane project. I'm not sure if Arthur has any updates on that part. Should we add it in the release for the 0.11?
For implementation of application scope?
Yeah.
Is there a design doc or anything open for that at this stage?
Yes, you can check the issue. We actually already post
Hello?
something like the DI proposal in the issue.
Hello. So it is on our backlog now. So the idea is that we're going to start looking to that this week. I'd like to understand better the scope of the work. So if we could use this week's meeting for the technical dive deep to clarify some questions, that would be great.
Yeah, it seems like unless this turns out to be really, really straightforward, I would suggest that maybe we don't aim for 0.11 to get this in, because that's 7 days from now.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't want it could be super simple, but if this does need like a design and review and stuff like that, I don't want us to rush it unless we need it in 0.11 for a particular reason.
Yeah, and we stick pretty strongly to monthly release cadence as well. So if something's more complicated, it doesn't at all fit into 0.11 in 1 week from now. That in essentially a month from now, we'll have another release 0.12 in mid-June. So that would be another boat or train to catch. And let me know if there was an issue that I can link in here, or if somebody can add, application scope issue or discussion to this agenda document here. That would be appreciated. Okay. And Sahil sent me a message this morning that there's a new PR opened about Route 53 support in AWS. So this is a brand new PR with support for some of those resources like hosted zones and resource record sets. We'll be able to take a look and get feedback on this one. Were there any other items of note for that, Sahil?
Yes, the PR is almost ready. There's just like a few formatting issues, and that's basically it. So I'll be done with that in like next couple of minutes and that. So I'll put it in review post that.
Oh, okay, cool. Take it out of draft.
Yeah.
Cool. Great.
Curious.
Go
ahead.
Yeah, just to mention, there's one more PR raised just before the call, which is by Ajay, which is for the certificate manager. I'll add that to this doc later.
Yes, please do. That's great.
Thanks very much. And yeah, I wanted to check in as well on the other two there. I think IAM policy was pretty good to go. We've got a couple of ones in the PRs on the provider AWS.
In AWS. Cool.
So is that true, Sahil? Is that pretty much just waiting for review and merge the IAM policy?
Yes, that's right, Nick. And for the network resources, I had a bit of complicated issue for comparing Route 50 through, not Route 53, route table issue, route table CRs with the managed resources. I worked upon that today, and I'll push an update in some time.
Okay, thank you.
So yeah, IAM policy is good to go. The network resources, I should update it in some time and let you know. And cache cluster, since we had made it lower on the priority, I haven't checked it in last couple of days, but yeah, I'll take a look and see if it's, if it needs a request from the master or anything.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, cool. So I think that's everything that we had on the PRs here listed too. We talked about some of the other AWS PRs. Were there any other agenda items to discuss today in this meeting?
Like you were saying something for the Route 53 PR?
Me, no, I
Okay.
haven't looked at that yet.
My bad.
Alrighty, cool. Well then, if that is everything here, all of our agenda items, then we can go ahead and adjourn for the week.
Cool. Thanks, Jared. Thanks, everybody.
Great.
See ya.
Thanks, everybody. Good to see everyone.
Yeah, thanks,
Take
guys.
care.
Thank you.